Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
All right, our guest today is a personal finance blogger and coach, a mother of four, a side hustler extraordinaire. She writes for and coaches large families on getting out of debt, increasing their income via side hustles, and setting a foundation for financial independence. So today I want to welcome on Jenni from FamilySizeFinance.com. Jenni, thanks for being with us today. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well.
And where are you calling in from? What's life looking like for you today?
From a small town in Texas. You've never heard of it. It's called Paducah. Actually, if you Google Paducah, you'll find there's a much larger one in Kentucky. So we're pretty tiny over here. So it's a lovely fall day out here. So
what's tiny? 5,000, 10,000, 1,000?
1,100. Oh. There's many more cows than people around here.
Okay, more cows than people. Well, I'm really excited to have you on. I think you have this really unique house hacking experience. It's not the traditional house hacking where we rented out rooms to roommates or we did this small multifamily.
No.
I'd really love if you could just sort of, to get us started, give us a sort of high-level summary of what your house hacking experience is.
We kind of found this house hacking by accident. We had bought a farm in New York, and the farming experience wasn't quite what we thought it would be. And my husband and I found ourselves looking for another job. My husband's a wildlife biologist. And so as we were looking, we found this position that he's in now, which is for a cattle ranch just outside of Paducah. And what we didn't know when we took the job is out here, if you're a ranch employee, it's pretty typical for housing to be covered as part of your salary. So it actually enabled us, because we got a housing allowance from the ranch to cover, our rent and utilities, that allowed us to keep the farm in New York and actually make that into a rental. So it's kind of a twofold house hacking story for us.
Awesome. Well, let's really sort of dig in. All right. So your husband's a wildlife biologist. You tried to do some farming in New York. You realize, hey, let's take a different career path. That's not what we thought it would be. It wasn't all that it cracked up to be. And then, why'd you pick Texas? Sort of random. Think, upstate New York to all the way down to Texas, or how'd you end up there?
Well, we've actually lived all over Montana, Nebraska, South Dakota. So Texas is one of a long string of states we've lived in, but we actually picked it because we had lived in Texas before. We lived in Lubbock previous, which is only a couple hours away. So we really liked it there. So we were actually really happy to go back and be near enough to friends to go visit. That was a big sell for our kids as well. It didn't seem so unfamiliar and scary to them because Texas, we know Texas because we've lived there before. So that was part of the reason.
And when you started looking for different jobs, were you really open to looking anywhere in the country, or was it, the opportunity in Texas came up and you're like, oh yeah, Texas, we're familiar with it, so let's go that route? Or was it this really sort of broad-based search?
It was a very broad-based search. Because we've lived all over, we're really not scared of moving to a place sight unseen since we've done it on multiple occasions. We were kind of looking to be nearer to family, which is part of why we decided to go to New York, but that wasn't working out. And I had family in Utah. And so we're kind of looking to be close to there. There were a couple opportunities in Idaho and I think in Eastern Washington that we looked at. But again, the housing was pretty expensive in those places, because they're beautiful and they need wildlife biologists, but that also makes them tourist spots and kind of expensive. So Paducah was a lot more affordable. That was another reason why we chose it.
Now, when you were looking at this job and the other jobs, was it a standard that housing was included, or was it just something, you're looking around, you're seeing these job postings, it seems interesting, and then you and your husband are leaning towards Texas, and this is sort of a nice surprise that comes up?
In wildlife biology, it's pretty typical for interns or temporary employees or even employees in really remote locations or just out of college to have housing, or at least like an allowance or like a minimal rent, be typical. if they've got usually they'll have like a bunkhouse or something like that. But they kind of assume that you're single. So it works great if you're a single person just out of college. Great. You have either cheap or free housing while you get your feet wet in the industry. It works out great. But if you're married with 4 kids, that doesn't work so well. And as you climb into positions of higher salary and more responsibility, you'll find that less and less common. Like, for example, none of his other positions in wildlife had any sort of housing allowance or free housing or anything like that. You do find it, but it's usually in temporary positions, or if you're studying the long-nosed bat in some random mountain cabin, then they'll provide you with a cabin or a bunkhouse like that.
Okay. And
a typical biologist position.
So you found the Texas opening. Did you know right off the bat that housing was included, or when you started applying for the job and learning about the salary, it came up, or did you negotiate that in?
No, we didn't negotiate it in. I think we did find out about it when it was with the posting, or at least we knew it at the point of the interview that was a part of it. So,
and I mean, what was your sort of thought process? A lot of times in personal finance, in house hacking, and really a lot of things people use, I found, their kids is a reason why they can't do stuff. It's like, oh, well, I could never do a house hack as a multifamily home because I've got kids, or, we can't move every couple of years because of kids. And it seems like you said, yeah, our kids are used to this. Let's go take them on this cool experience. Like, how'd your kids react to the thought of that? What was your sort of thought process?
Well, actually, we had considered a house hack when we were purchasing a home in Lubbock, but there just weren't that many duplexes that were big enough for our family. So that was a big limiting factor. We actually looked, but where we were, it really wasn't a huge possibility. Like, if we would have waited for a year or more, we might have been able to find one. But can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, so it sounded like you had moved pretty often. Is that something your kids just got used to, or is that sort of a lifestyle that all of you as a family created? It's mom, dad, the 4 kids, we're going to move around, we're going to have these cool experiences.
The moving around was kind of a series of unfortunate or fortunate events. Like, some of them were layoffs, some of them were promotions. Some of them, we mindfully chose to move because the job wasn't working out. And so while we didn't plan that to be our life, but as we went through those, trials of moving from place to place, we realized that we're a lot more resilient than we thought. Our kids are a lot more resilient than we thought. And luckily none of our kids have special needs. I'm sure that would have, factored in much differently if they had, or there should have been some special medical situation. But I think, for the average kid, they survive moves. They make friends, they cry, but they make friends and they get used to a new school system with a new teacher, and they're really resilient. And so we knew that this next time, even if it wouldn't have been close to what they knew, we could have done that.
Yeah, I know my wife is definitely a big city girl, grew up in the Twin Cities, went to school in Boston. But for me, the idea of living in some more remote areas, these smaller towns on big ranches, I think as a kid, that would have been a phenomenal experience to have that and be in these different parts of the country that has more nature, not the big city, beautiful scenery, and around animals.
Yeah, it's cool. It's being out in the country and on a farm or a ranch, you get a special kind of education that you just cannot get anywhere else. So when the time came for the birds and the bees talk, we had a great premise already in place. My son knew plenty from watching the cows on farm. So
that's definitely an interesting take.
Understand, and even just like understanding where your food comes from, understanding, that sweat, like what sweat equity is, that blood, sweat, and tears is how you make a living, whether that's, milking cows or, working in an office, that like they realize that, dad and mom, that's what they do. And it has varied from time to time what we've been doing and how we've been doing it. But that's kind of an education for them a little bit.
Yeah, actual real life experience versus like some of my friends when I was graduating college, they couldn't change a tire on a car. They couldn't iron unless it was ramen noodle. They really couldn't cook anything. It sounds like your kids are getting these actual real life experiences that are going to benefit them when they're adults.
Oh yeah. Today we spent the afternoon picking apples from our apple tree, and my son shot his first deer, and so we've been processing meat for winter all day long. They know exactly where their food's coming from. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to your housing. Your husband got the job. You moved to this small town in Texas, town of about 1,100 people. What does the actual housing situation look like? And I know you said you had a big family. It's 4 kids. So, tell me how that ended up working out.
Well, the agreement with my husband's employer was actually that they were going to build him a house because they didn't have one currently available on the ranch. The other ones were all occupied with cowboys and foremen and things. And so in lieu of that, they've been providing us a housing allowance, and we've been renting a house in Paducah itself. It was a minor miracle that we even got one at all. There's almost no rentals to be had here, and no one ever uses anything like Craigslist.
Yeah.
And so unless you know someone in town that has a rental, you don't find out about it. It's not anywhere on the internet. We're back a few decades around here. And so luckily the office manager knew someone trying to sell a big old house, and she said, she approached them and said, "Hey, would you be willing to rent it?" And they said yes. So that's how we got our current rental house in town. And by the grace of God, it was big enough for all of us. There aren't that many houses in town that are, so that was pretty awesome. And then they will start work on building the house that we will live in on the ranch in January. So.
Okay. And so
we're pretty excited about that.
I can imagine. So they're giving you a stipend right now. Was it a flat amount and you could find anything in that price range, or if you spent less, you could keep it?
No, it's a flat amount. And then, so the flat amount is $900 and rent is $650. And then utilities, depending on the season, run from maybe $200 to $350. It's an old house with bad insulation.
But in some months, you're essentially breaking even, or might even, if the utilities are low, pocket a little bit of money. And then I imagine during the AC, summer, you got to have the AC cranking. It's a little bit more. But so you're essentially with the job, though, having your housing costs almost cost neutral or costing you $50, $100 a month.
Pretty much. And luckily, that's enabled us to keep the mortgage on the farm that we have and allow my brother-in-law to keep farming. So that's been an extra added bonus too.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that you're actually able to do that and have that there. The low housing costs here, so you can actually keep the farm in upstate New York that you had mentioned earlier. Do you have any say in the house that they're actually building for you, or are they going to build sort of a standard house that when you guys are done and your husband's contract's up, someone else can go in, or do you get to pick out paint and tile and flooring and all of that stuff, or do they sort of take care of everything?
I think they have a few stock plans. The ranch he's part of is part of a system of ranches, and they have ranches all throughout the United States and Canada. And so I think I'm assuming they have an architect that has like a couple stock plans that I think we could choose from. And then I think we get some say in the finishes, the paint, the flooring, the doorknobs, things like that.
Well, that's pretty cool. If you can even add just a little bit of customization, really make it feel like home.
Oh yeah, for sure. My husband and my son and I were talking today about the forts we're going to build outside, and he wants a dirt bike track. We'll see if the ranch is okay with that, but so we're all really excited about it.
Awesome. So when your husband took the job, was there a defined contract period that he had to sign for, or was it essentially open-ended? Gets hired, stays on as long as you guys like it? Okay. So, I mean, that's pretty cool that they're actually investing in building a house to house you. And, if you guys had a better opportunity come around, you could essentially leave, or you could end up being there for 10 years.
Yeah, we're hoping it's the latter. We're kind of done with moving around. And our kids are getting old enough that while they're resilient, moving still isn't a cakewalk.
Yeah, I definitely hate moving. The whole part of figuring out what you want to pack up and then having to pay to ship it somewhere else and then unpack it and try to figure out all of that mess. Yeah, it definitely is. If you're not really planning on leaving, is this sort of going to be your spot now then until your kids finish sort of elementary, middle, high school period and go off to college?
That's the plan. Yeah, we don't say the P word, permanent, because then we just move 6 months later. But yes, that's the plan. Our kids are in a great school, and the job is fantastic. We've been making some good friends here. So we're hoping that this is definitely long term.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. So, sort of looking back at this experience, this non-traditional house hack where you end up getting your housing costs paid for. If you sort of think through it, like, are there any tips or tricks or sort of best practices you could give to someone else that might be looking in that similar field as your husband for, what could they do to find a similar situation where housing's provided?
I think the best opportunity for a similar house hack would probably be, like I said, when you're first out of college and you're single and you can go anywhere. There are tons of jobs that we've come across, and I think, oh, if only we could, just me and my husband go and research the elk in Canada, or the beetles in Mexico or whatever. We could go and get free housing, and that'd be fantastic. But as you kind of climb to more responsibility, those opportunities are less and less common. So I would lock it in, do what you can while you're still young. And even once you have kids, and this probably goes for people in any industry, give house hacking a look. Like, I wasn't really into personal finance as much as I am now when the house hacking was a real opportunity in Lubbock. And I wish that I would have given that a harder look. Just looking at the numbers and looking at what you can do to get housing for free, and how much the trajectory that can put you on is just amazing. And kids they'll fill as much room as you give them, whether that's a 500 square foot apartment or a 2,200 square foot house. They'll fill it. It doesn't really matter too much. So as long as the necessities are covered. And I think another tip I give is, especially employees in agriculture, ranching, and things like that. There's where you see a lot of housing as well. My husband's, he's kind of 1 foot in ranching / farming, and 1 foot in wildlife biology, which is another reason why this job is so perfect. There are several ranches in the area here that offer their employees free housing, and even there's a small ranching town just to the south of us that offer the teachers there free housing as well, because it's so small and they need to have, and that's where the school is. Then these ranch kids need to go to school somewhere, and so they have to bring in teachers, and one of the ways they do that is they incentivize that with the free housing. So almost everyone in town is connected to the school somehow, because the school offers free housing. So that's pretty cool one too.
Yeah, definitely.
Not in our industry, but those tiny little opportunities do exist if you can find them.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think about things creatively, I mean, you just mentioned essentially 3 different industries, agriculture, ranching, you got your wildlife, and then teaching. I've heard about folks that have done teaching overseas and had housing provided, but you just gave a great example of a place here, actually in the United States, where if you're willing to do something a little bit differently and you want to be a teacher, go be a teacher, and here's a place you can go to actually get your housing covered for you.
Yeah, and even if you just did that for 5 years, even if, rural Texas is not your thing, even if you tough it out for a few years, you can save quite a bit. So doing that.
You really set yourself up financially for years to come. And then sort of thinking back through this house hacking experience that you had, what do you think your biggest challenge was, that if you could do it differently, or if you could go back and change something, what would you actually go back and change?
I don't think I would change anything about the house hacking experience itself. Anything I would change is about how we, managed keeping the farm. But I don't know that's directly related to the house hack. I don't know that I would change anything necessarily. I feel like we've been really fortunate and blessed to have, basically, like you said, the housing expense be neutral for us, and it's a great place to raise a family.
Wonderful. And I know you said you want to sort of make this your semi-permanent place for a while, but now that you've sort of been spoiled by this experience, if, 5 years down the road, is this something you try to look for a new job where like they're going to provide housing for the whole family, or try to negotiate that in?
Well, we'll certainly try. I mean, like I said, I don't know if you could repeat this one if you tried, but it's certainly a strong incentive to stay. And I'm sure it's designed to be that way somewhat, being as remote as we are, but it's definitely something we'd look for. Again, if you're looking at a government biologist job, and a lot of them are for government, there are some private ones, but most of them are government based. You'll find a lot less of that. If we ever could do it again, you bet we'd try. And if we went back to owning a home, I would definitely look into the traditional house hack if we had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think those opportunities are out there for that sort of small multifamily unit. It just takes some looking, and then some cities are better than others. I know where I grew up in North Carolina, I did 2 house hacks there, but it was more of the room rental style, and there were multifamily. I probably could have done one when I was in my 20s. It was really tough. I think if you got to the point where you're married and having a family to find that sort of ideal situation. But where I'm at now in New Orleans, uh, my third house hack was the first house hack I did with my wife. And then we just closed on our fourth house hack that we're getting ready to start working on. In New Orleans, this older style city, it's very, very common where you have this old giant house that's maybe 4,000 square feet, has a huge yard, was divided up into a duplex or a triplex. And it makes it more, I think, conducive to house hacking for families. So I think a lot of it just depends on the city that you go to. And some have a lot more multifamily than other cities.
Yeah, and one thing I've also seen is a lot of properties, like you said, will have that bigger house, and then in the backyard they'll have a mother-in-law suite or a very large shed that you could, adapt to be a studio apartment. I actually had a friend in Lubbock that did exactly that, and she did Airbnb. Our houses were almost identical, and ours it was a garden shed, and so it wasn't big at all. Maybe 10 by 10. It was quite tiny, but it didn't even have plumbing. But she was able to Airbnb. They did some renovations and made it nice with a bed and a wall heater or whatever, and made that into a little Airbnb space. So I definitely look for anything like that, regardless of where we were, to take advantage of that house hacking opportunity.
Well, if you definitely end up moving and you find a new place to do a house hack, make sure to write it up in your blog. That way people can read about the story and you can help keep pushing out this movement of getting people to think about their housing definitely creatively.
For sure. And I'd love to get that out to families as well. Because like you said, a lot of people think, oh, I have kids, I can't do it. I mean, I fell into that trap too. But really, you can if you choose to. Might be a little bit tight, but you could do it.
Yeah, like you said, kids will fill as much space as you give them. So if while they're young, they got to put 2 kids in a room and share on bunk beds. After a while, they'll be used to it. Great. So at this point, before we sort of wrap up the show, this is where I like to ask our guests a set of final 6 questions, and we like to call this
The Famous 6.
Are you ready for it?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Awesome. All right. So number 1, what is your favorite personal finance blog or book that you've read recently?
I am a big fan of Choose FI.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably a pretty common one. But I also like House of Fi. I love that she's got a big family and is still pursuing financial independence. And so I like those 2.
I haven't heard of that one. I'm going to go look it up and also put it in the show notes. So House of Fi, yeah, I'll have to look that one up. All right. And then number 2, what is your favorite real estate related blog or book that you've read somewhat recently?
Oh, I'm sure everyone that comes on the show says this, but Bigger Pockets has been a wealth of information that's been a lifesaver in so many facets. So that's definitely my favorite blog.
Yeah, the Bigger Pockets is a great resource. All right, so let's go on to number 3. Especially since you moved around a lot, I think this is pretty relevant. What's been your favorite travel destination so far?
Ooh, I would have to say we took our family to Florida. One of the ranches owned by the system my husband worked for is in Florida. And so he had a work trip. So we just decided to cart everybody along. And so we took the kids. It's about an hour or 2 outside of Orlando, Florida. And we spent a week just on the beach. I think we hit Legoland as our one big touristy destination, but they just soaked up the beach. So the beach in Florida, I could just live there and watch the waves forever. So
awesome. Well, maybe you'll have to get your husband to find his next job on a coastal town and find a job that will also pay for the housing on that coastal town.
That'd be fantastic.
Awesome. And then number 4, what's next on your sort of travel vacation list? Do you have any family trips coming up or anything you want to do in the next year or 2?
My husband and I have just been turned on to travel hacking, like this credit cards and things. We've been burned by credit cards a couple times, and so we're pretty leery, but we've been really conscientious and making sure they pay off every month, and we're saving up for a trip to Austria and Italy in 2021. We're we're really excited about that.
So Italy is my favorite country. I've been there 4 times. Next year I'm going back for my 5th time. And then 2 years ago, my wife and I were in Europe, and one of the places we went to was Austria. I absolutely love it. We're really big on the credit card travel hacking, especially I think it pairs really well with real estate, because a lot of times when you're investing in real estate or buying real estate or doing a house hack, you're going to have some large expenses come up. There's no better way than to do that credit card sign-up bonus and get it, and then use those points to go travel.
Yeah, and it gives you a silver lining. We had to replace the pellet stove for our tenant, and so I was like, oh man, that's so much money, but I get travel rewards, and that made it, it's like the sugar that helps the medicine go down a little bit.
Absolutely. So where in Italy is sort of your places you're thinking of going?
Oh, I think we're going to start in Austria. My husband's grandmother's actually from Austria. Like, she would speak to them in German sometimes. And so we are going to go back to that kind of ancestral home. It's like right on the border of Austria and Italy. It's called Coron Venosta. I'd try to pronounce it in German, but I'd butcher it. So I call it Coron Venosta. It's actually in Italy now. Previously, it was in Austria, but post-World War II, they redrew the boundaries. So now it's in Italy. So we'll probably start there, and that's like a small ski type of a town. So I'm hoping we get to go skiing, and then we'll probably hit Venice. I'm crossing my fingers that we can hit Carnival. I know that's going to be expensive, but I thought that would be really cool to see. And then Rome and Florence. I read The Agony and the Ecstasy in my junior year of high school, and ever since then, I'm like, I need to go to Florence before I die. So this is definitely a bucket list opportunity for me.
Yeah, you'll have a great time. I'm sure of it. Italy is an amazing country. Even Austria was fantastic. I'm always drawn to Italy and keep going back. All right, so that brings us on to question number 5 is, what is the biggest bucket list item that you haven't accomplished yet?
Oh, that Florence trip is up there. Publishing a book I would like to do.
Oh, so
I've decided exactly what kind of a book. I do some creative writing and personal finance stuff. Not sure which love is going to, win out for first place on that one, but we'll see.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to accomplish one of them, and maybe you'll be really ambitious and you'll write 2 books, one personal finance related and then one on the creative side.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be great.
Awesome. And then number 6, what is your favorite life hack?
Related to real estate or just in general?
Anything. You can do both if you want to do both, but anything.
House hacking is a pretty sweet one. So is travel hacking. Life hacking in general. We like to meal prep a lot at my house because with 6 of us, that's a lot of food. We go through it, and cooking's great, but you can only handle so much of it at a time. So the greatest life hack I've seen is to meal prep a lot of chicken at once and to shred it quickly. I stick it in my KitchenAid and turn it on with the paddle attachment. I can't remember. I think my sister turned me onto that, and life-changing.
And it just shreds it for you?
You don't have to chop the chicken before you stick it in the freezer. So.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm actually going to have to start doing that. We've got not the KitchenAid mixer, but we got another one that's sort of similar type.
Yep. Those stand mixers are fantastic.
Awesome. Well, Jenni, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your sort of unique house hacking experience. We're going to put your blog and all your information in our show notes so folks can find you. But again, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.